Hey everyone, Drea here with Unfiltered Wines, and today we are talking natural wines. So, natural wines, organic wine, biodynamic wine, sustainably farmed. What's it all mean? And really, what does it mean in terms of what you're tasting, what you want, and what you're gonna find at the wine store? Let's dig in just a little bit. Let's start off with natural wines. So, natural wines, or wines according to nature, or real wine, or artisanal wine. It's got many names, right? What is it though? Well, it starts off with organic grapes, and what you're talking about is like a spontaneous fermentation of what is considered the must, right? Another way of saying, technically it's the grape juice, right? So it's what happens when you've extracted, crushed, and pressed these organic grapes and you've just left them there without adding any other substances, right? That, in and of itself, is the beginning of natural wine. So natural wines also have certain characteristics, right? So they're not gonna have synthetic substances. In the vineyards, you're only gonna treat them with copper and sulfur, right? No additional chemical things. You're gonna think about maximizing the grapes that you're planting, but low yields, and you're gonna pick them by hand. You want the very best grapes. You're not going for mass quantities here. You're going for a small portion of the very, very best. And the type of grapes matter as well. You want what they call, wait for it, autochthonous. You want grapes that are native, right? Fancy way of saying grapes that are native to the area, right? So grapes that are indigenous, right? You don't want to be pulling vines from another country, bringing them to where you are and calling it natural wine. That's not really the point. No chemical additives to change any sort of appearance or taste. And you also are thinking natural yeast. Now this is yeast that's growing on the grapes, right, as they're growing, not something that's created in a lab. You're also gonna think minimum sulfur dioxide that's normally used to stabilize and disinfect the grapes. In some areas, when you talk natural wine, you absolutely cannot use any of that at all, right? So you're thinking minimal interference by anything other than nature, right? So there really isn't a unanimous consensus or even a body that actually is governing natural wine, right? So as you can probably imagine, growers and vineyards who consider themselves makers of natural wine are constantly in some sort of controversy about who is really making and who is not making natural wine. You know, what they have in common is a real desire to give you an authentic taste of what we call the terroir, which is a combination of factors, right? Terroir is the land, it's the soil composition, the type of soil, but it's also the weather. It's also the variance of sun and rain in a particular area in a particular year. And what natural winemakers are seeking to give you is all of that really authentically, so that the wine that you're drinking is really a representation of that area, to the point of where it's literally unique per bottle, right? Wine is in fact alive. So then we're talking organic wines. Okay, well, what are organic wines? Well, first, they're a lot more governed, right? At least in the US, you know, we love to govern things. If you're talking USDA organic wines, well, you've got some strict things to deal with, right? First, you're definitely gonna start with organic grapes, right? So no pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers, definitely. But you're also going to have to use organic yeast. So we're talking again about that yeast that's actually naturally occurring on the grapes, nothing chemically put together. So you're also gonna be talking about no addition of sulfites, right? So not at all, although if they're occurring naturally as sort of a release as part of the winemaking process, that can be okay. This will get you a USDA organic seal. Now, some organic wines are not quite up to that level of specification, so you might see something that says made with organically grown grapes, right? So This is also going to be a similar process of winemaking, right? So the grapes are organic, again, no pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers, but the yeast that's used here may not be quite your organic growing on the grape yeast, right? It's okay if it's a slightly different, slightly a more man-made yeast, or just a different type of yeast. And in this case, sulfites will be allowed, but it's a very controlled amount. It's about 100 parts per million or less, which is a pretty small amount, but still. It's allowed, and it's got to be bottled and produced in an organic facility. And now that's just to be able to get the made with organically grown grapes label on there. So if you're following me, you're getting that there's a real intention here. And I think that's what part of what separates this movement. The wine is not, it's sort of coming together in a very purposeful way. Wine itself tends to also, just in general, as an industry, be a purposeful exercise. People aren't just sort of mixing grapes and vats. So even if you're not drinking wine that's natural or organic or made with organically grown grapes, know that you're drinking a product that's being intentionally made by winemakers all over the world. But coming back, biodynamic wines, right? So what are these? Biodynamic wines are private companies that follow sort of a philosophy, right? And this is the philosophy of a philosopher scientist. His name is Rudolf Steiner. And he was all about this sort of holistic view of agriculture, right? So you want this balance between agriculture and the larger cosmic ecosystem. Cue fancy stars. What you're talking about here are growth cycles. This isn't really new for anyone who's, done any looking at things that are sort of holistic and that, follow moon cycles or phases, right? When you're thinking about biodynamic wines, you're thinking about winemakers who have given that a lot of thought. They're giving thought to picking grapes at night, under moonlight for specific regions, growing grapes in seasonal spaces so that they're following sort of the land and the climate. You really want to strike a balance. You want to maintain the fertility of the soil, and they're also interested in having the vines and the land be self-sustaining. What do I mean by that? That means that the land actually learns how to heal itself, right? It actually produces what it needs to keep the vines fresh, to keep things growing in a way that's really organic and doesn't require a lot of man-made input. Quite an interesting concept. So when we talk about organic wines and natural wines and biodynamic, you're also talking about not just the wine growing, the grape growing and the wine making, but you're also talking about the sustainable production methods that most of the vineyards that make these type of wines really believe in. They tend to be smaller, right? These grapes tend to be grown by smaller vineyards. They tend to control the growing process very closely, as I've mentioned. So they're also gonna control things like minimizing water consumption. They're gonna make sure that their packaging, tends to be lighter caps, lighter bottles, eco-friendly transport. These are people who are really interested in preservation, preserving the land and giving you this authentic experience that is less about you and I and more about what we've come into or the space we've come into. It's a great way to get an authentic expression of an area or a region. Speaking of authentic areas and regions, there are two really great ones that I want to get into. The first is Sancerre in the Loire Valley in France. Now, this is an area that is going to be like south-facing slopes, hilly in terms of the altitude. So you've got somewhere between like 655, 1,300 feet in terms of the type of slopes that we're talking about. And what really makes Sancerre distinctive is going to be the types of clay and soil that are going to really give you different flavors in your wine. This is a lovely Sancerre here. It is a Domaine des Côtes Blanches Sancerre. It is an organic one, and it is going to be reflective of the area that it's from, right? So you've got 3 different categories of soil types that are growing in Sancerre. And now, don't worry, I'm not just talking soil to talk soil. It actually really matters, right? So you've got the first type, which is this kind of white clay limestone soil, right? And this is gonna give you wines that have a bit more of like a perfumed essence, right? Floral, and it's gonna have really long aging potential. So for those of us who have heard about like red wines being aged in people's cellars, you know, you don't really hear about a lot of white wines being ageable. Sancerres that come from the sort of western part of the Loire Valley are going to be really great for aging. Then you've got this second type of soil. It's around the village of Chivagnol, and which is a cru in the Sancerre area, and cru just means a growing region. That's what they call them, crus. So if you hear that term, that's what that means. And what you're gonna have in this soil is gonna be like limestone rocks that have like a dark, chalky kind of like limestone, and it's got some actual seashells in it as well, okay? And this is also gonna be in the western part of Sancerre, and what you're gonna get from sort of these Sancerres is gonna be more body and flavor in the profile, right? So you wanna be, if that's your style, a more sort of fuller bodied white Sancerre, you're gonna wanna look for wines that are around this Chivagnol region of Sancerre. The third type of soil classification is found right around the city of Sancerre itself. You're gonna have a little bit of flint, a little bit of mineral composition, and that's gonna show up in sort of a lighter bodied wine with a really delicate sort of floral sense, right? So the closer you get into Sancerre, you sort of lose some of that heavy floral that you get a bit farther away in sort of the Pinot Salon kind of western area of the Loire Valley, right? So again, when you think of natural organic wines, what you want to think of is representation of the land. You want to think about what's the region like, what's the soil like. That's going to tell you a lot about what you're going to get from the wine. So when you're in the wine store, right? If you're thinking, I want something from, you know, I want a natural wine, I want one from Sancerre, okay? The closer you get to the city, you're gonna lose some of that perfumed essence. You know, you're gonna lose a little bit of body, right? You go a little bit further out from the city, you gain some body, you gain some perfumed essence. Further out, you gain a little bit more, right? So these are the things that matter when you're thinking about choosing your wine type. Another really amazing area when you're talking about natural and organic wines coming over to the US is gonna be Willamette Valley in Oregon, right? So Willamette Valley is in Western Oregon, and it is one of the most super important non-Californian, we call them AVAs, right? Which stands for American Viticultural Area. It essentially is just like a cru in France. It's a certain vineyard zone. It has a very specific geography and a very specific growing climate that allows for certain varieties of wine to grow there. The most popular of which is Pinot Noir. So most of the vineyards in this region are going to be found on the hills in the valley. The soil there is a lot less fertile. It's going to be a little bit more rocky, but you've got a lot less risk of frost, right? So these hills actually have a very special soil. It's red, it's got a lot of iron in it, it's called Jory, and it's so popular it is the, quote, official soil of Oregon. Who knew? The best Pinot Noirs from Oregon are actually compared to Burgundies from France, right? Because they've got a climate that's somewhat similar. You know, in Willamette Valley, you've got this sort of almost like maritime climate. You've got ocean breezes that seep through the mountains that give you, it'll take a little bit of that heat off. You've got rain falling mostly in the winter, long dry summers, a lot of sunshine, cooler evenings. It's perfect for ripening these grapes. So again, soil, important, right? It says a lot about what's gonna grow there, right? And you wanna be thinking about what's indigenous. What are the types of varietals that are actually like indigenous to this area? These are things you can ask. Again, at the wine store, you're gonna get a lot more authentic, natural, or organic wine experience, or biodynamic, depending on your preference. And now you know the difference between the three. If you enjoyed this video, we hope that you will like it and also choose to follow us here at Unfiltered Vines. Better yet, come join us in an Unfiltered Vines wine experience. We would love to have you, and we'd love to help you find more wines you love and know why you love them. Until next time, take care. Bye.